Hey guys, welcome to Slaytech. Today we'll be working on the AxisFlying Avata 3.5-inch kit. You can see the bottom of this camera is a little damaged. We'll fix that later with a 3D print. I'll be trying to highlight the parts and material lists throughout the video, so you can keep along. Just make sure you have everything you need. Let's go ahead and start taking off the props. And once we're finished with the props, we're going to start taking off the downward facing sensor. There'll be 2 screws and there'll be a ribbon attached underneath. You can remove this ribbon using a tweezer or like a small flathead screwdriver, like a very small one. And once you got the sensor removed, we can move on to the USB extension. This will be set in place with 2 screws. Just pop that in. The 2 screws we'll be using are the number 1, which is the M2 by 6mm countersunk screws. Soldering the USB extension is pretty straightforward. Voltage to voltage, D minus, D minus, D plus to D plus, ground to ground. As always, it's best to tin everything before you make the connection. Just makes it fall nicely together. So as with soldering anything, heat builds up, and if you connect it to something while you're soldering, that heat is dissipated to whatever you connected it to. So it is a good idea to connect it to something first, solder the wire so heat doesn't build up in one spot, it's displaced. Now we are putting the number 4 screws in, and that'll be going to standoffs. That is the M3 by 8mm countersunk screws. Alright, we'll start with the bottom of the Avata, and we're going to start taking off these side screws that will remove the antennas. Now we will remove the bottom screws. We can also start moving on to the top screws. The second from the right has a security piece of gunk inside of it. I got it out with a little tiny screwdriver, this little flathead, and just kind of pried it out. And that's just how they know that you voided the warranty. Once that's removed, you can actually remove this whole bottom plastic piece. Just gonna make sure these antennas are out of the way so nothing gets pulled. I could have sped this up, but I wanted you to see the struggle. Alright, moving on to these antenna screws, just take one on each. You can go ahead and start removing these motor screws. Done, you can slide this open and you can start removing the antenna. You can use something like a tweezer or again a small fine flathead. Seems to work out for me. Once that's removed, you can start taking off the middle screw in the very middle of the body. And then we'll be moving on to the side screws. At this point, we should be able to break it completely open. So make sure you carefully remove the ribbon. And the GPS will be loose too, you can just remove that. Peel back this, you can see the opening. You can also remove that ribbon cable. So you'll notice that the camera is gone in this shot. You did not need to remove the camera from this bracket, but you do need to remove these rubber plugs. So you can just leave the camera attached. Now we're going to remove the top bolts to expose the ESC. Once you've exposed the ESC, you can start removing the ribbon cable on the side. ESC can now be just pulled off, it's just sitting on thermal paste. So AxisFlying does not recommend that you do this and solder your own solder joints to the board. They actually recommend that you cut the wires and then use heat shrink to seal it. If you're a die-hard, build your own kind of guy, it's probably not for us. So yeah, you can go ahead and remove these covers, and then you can remove the motors. Just save those covers for later because you will need them again, unless you just have your own tape you want to use. To remove this kind of glue stuff, you do have to like cut it to kind of snap it off the surface. So once you removed the connector, you're going to have to expose the leads. So just take some cutters or a razor and try to lift up that heat shrink. And then you can take a soldering iron and remove those wires. And then again, reapply some solder to make it nice and clean. You can see I add a little solder here just to kind of displace more heat. Now let's go back to the camera situation. Adding this camera to the frame was the biggest bear by far. I highly recommend you use either a wire or a piece of floss like I did. You shove both ends in and then you wrap around the end of the rubber grommet, and I would do like 2 wraps around the garment and then try to pull it up through. And this took the longest part, I would say, of the build. And once you finally get that out of the way, you can put the ribbon cable on the little right side hole on the back, and then just lay the cable in that channel. Alright, so you're not supposed to add the GPS quite yet, but we did anyway. You're supposed to add these number 8 standoffs with the number 6 M3 by 8mm countersunk screws. Make sure you do that first before adding this GPS. You'll see why later on. The GPS is screwed in with the number 3, which is the M2 by 6mm countersunk screw. Let's get these motors opened. So here we're just seeing the length of motor wire we need, because we obviously don't need that much motor wire. The length of this wire could have been a lot shorter by about maybe 10 millimeters. So be careful and measure ahead of time, unlike what we did. Some heat shrink to these. And now you can start soldering the lead, and of course just pre-tin everything. Once you've soldered on the battery lead, you can start applying the pieces of tape. Just make sure everything will fit back in the case. We can start applying the motor screws. Now we're going to apply the number 1 screw, which is the M1.6 by 8 millimeter. Then we can start reapplying the screws for the antenna. Now we're going to mount the battery lead, and you'll notice why I said I wish it was a little bit shorter. Nevertheless, it will work. This will be mounted with 2 screws on a little piece of rubber. This will be the M2 by 10 millimeter, which is the number 4. We can go ahead and reapply the side screws. So because we did not screw this in earlier before installing the GPS, we have to do it a little ghetto. Finally installing the studs that I said you guys should have done earlier. Now we can install the antennas. Just go ahead and wrap that on the piece of foam and then insert this into the duct. Alright, we can install the USB extension and install the bottom plate. The bottom plate will be installed first with the number 3, which is the M3 by 6 millimeter screws. This is a button top. Just making sure this ribbon is not snagged on anything. You can go ahead and try to make the ducts go into place. They're going to be screwed in with the outside screws. There's a carbon fiber spacer with 2 nuts. The screws are the number 2, which is the M3 by 16 millimeter screws. Here I am applying force with my finger on the back side. We can start reattaching the bottom sensor ribbon cable. And those would be the number 5, the M2 by 6 millimeter. Now we can add the final standoffs. You can add these little rubber grommets they give you on the end of those for landing pads. And now we can add the standoffs on the side of the camera plates in order to use the GoPro mount. Now we're just applying some tape in order to keep the motor wires from moving around. Next, we can install the props. Please double check your prop directions. And we are good to go. Want to give a big shout out to David for letting me film his hands with my camera and letting me edit and build this video for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this how-to video for the Avata 3.5-inch AxisFlying conversion kit. Please subscribe and hit the like button.